Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Tyler Spears from KBI. Thanks for joining today's webinar about insurance and risk management for AIG members. Big thank you to the AIG for making today possible. I promise to try to make this informative, interesting, and hopefully not boring, but it's insurance, so no guarantees. Let's start by quickly going over our agenda. As you can see here, we'll be talking about the exclusive insurance program as a member benefit for AIG members. We'll touch on KBI briefly for anybody who doesn't know who we are. We'll help you understand why you need insurance in the first place and help you identify your unique risks as a consultant. We'll provide an overview of the AIG insurance program, which includes professional indemnity and public liability. And outside of the PI and the PL insurance just mentioned, we'll look at the other insurance considerations as well. We'll also look at risk management and vital things to consider from an insurance perspective, in particular when signing contracts. We'll touch on a few of the most frequently asked questions we get, and we'll wrap up by providing some detail on how to access our offering, and then we'll open it up to some Q&A. So the insurance program as a member benefit. Program we've put together has been in place for many years now as a member benefit, giving AIG members access to tailored insurance fit for purpose that's also competitively priced. If you've ever looked for insurance outside of the program, what you would most likely have found is that most insurance brokers don't know what a geologist does. They don't understand the risks. And if you were able to get insurance, it was probably quite expensive. That's why we started working with the AIG nearly 8 years ago now to make this insurance offering accessible, to make sure all members can get insurance and that it's competitively priced. Within the program is the key elements of cover that most consultants require, but each policy is tailored to suit you as a consultant. Whether you're a new consultant providing some low-level field work or an experienced geologist providing resource estimates, the policies have been structured to suit your needs and your budget. So it's not just an off-the-shelf product. We've made sure that, depending on what level of consultant you are, your size, the scope that you work to, you can find a policy that works for you. As you can see, there's broad cover for a range of services typically provided in space. And we work with a fantastic insurance partner in Chubb Insurance. Most people would know who they are, but if you don't, they're one of the leading insurers globally, and we're really excited that they're part of the program. In addition to the products available, the other member benefit is access to us. So we're experts in this space. Myself, I've been working on this program, 8 years now. And outside of this, we also work with all sorts of mining consultants and people in the field. So we understand the space well, and we're here to help. So that takes us to this slide, which is just a little bit about us as the team. I'll just touch on it briefly. As mentioned, my name is Tyler. I've been with KBI for more than 8 years. I'm an owner of the business, and I've worked closely with AIG since I started here. I've enjoyed working with all the members over the years. Everyone who passed through the doors, I've spoken to them, which is great. And I continue to learn so much about the industry. And I really enjoy being part of this program. I work closely with my colleague Alex, who is based in our Sydney office. Alex does a lot of work with our insurer partner Chubb, making sure that we offer members great cover and great premiums. We'll touch on KBI briefly. We're a national brokerage, and we celebrated our 10-year anniversary last year, so that was great. We're based in Perth, and being in Perth, we have an extensive experience across insurance within the mining industry, from geologists, mining consultants, to exploration companies producing mines, and we work closely with boards of the ASX listed companies. So let's start with a good question. As a consultant, so you're a consultant, maybe you've just taken a leap or thinking of taking the leap. The first thing you probably, well, hopefully not the first thing, but one of the first things, maybe when you look to sign a contract, is why do I need insurance? And that's a great question. At its most basic level, geoscience consultants buy insurance to A, protect themselves from advisor services they provide, or B, protect themselves from accidents occurring on site. They may also choose to cover themselves for their own injuries, like workers' comp sort of stuff, or their equipment if they have any. Digging a little deeper into the reasons that you're buying the protection. Firstly, most contracts, especially in the mining exploration space, will require insurance before you can work. Almost everyone will ask for public liability insurance, and many will also ask for professional indemnity. It does depend on what you do, and we'll dig into that a little bit further as well. And lots of contracts will also ask for workers' comp insurance. So that's covering yourself for your own injury and if you have any employees or contractors. Again, we'll dig into these a little bit further on. The second reason is peace of mind and personal protection. So as a consultant or a contractor, one of the biggest differences is you are actually taking on your own risks. So as a staff member of a mining company or exploration company, you have that protection of the company. And the reason, maybe you become a consultant or a contractor is to get that freedom, but you're also taking on that risk. And that's a big reason why these companies want to use contractors and consultants, because it pushes the risk away from the company. So that's why insurance is so important. If something goes wrong, it's not just on you, you have the backing of an insurance policy. So now we figured out that you do need insurance. Let's figure out what you need. So there are several factors when you're identifying your key risks. These include, your size, the annual revenue that you expect to make or that you do make, if you have any employees or contractors, the type of services you're providing, the risks of a field assistant versus an exploration manager or a competent person signing off on resource estimates. All those risks are different, and you have different insurance needs. Other things include location of your projects. Are you working in WA, Africa, the US? Are you traveling to site? Are you just working from home, just doing desktop stuff, or are you doing manual labor, anything like that? And lastly, your digital footprint. So how reliant are you on technology? If something goes wrong with your technology, what happens? Let's continue on and we'll look at the insurance coverages in more detail, depending on what your risks are. So for a bit of background, I mentioned this before, but the program was established in 2015, so nearly 10 years. We have insured over 200 geoscientists right now. Over that time, many more than that. As you probably know, watching this, consultants sort of drift from working in a company to consulting and back and forth. So we've met a lot of great people and learned a lot over this time. A few years ago, we moved to Chubb from a different insurer, which just increased the strength of the program. And we recently expanded the scope of services available under the offering. So really what we're trying to show here is it's something that we're continuing to work on. We're always trying to make it better. We've improved it a lot since 2015, and we hope to continue to add to it and go from strength to strength. The last point is there's a dedicated broker team to service AIG members. So, access to me and my colleagues. We understand geologists, geoscience. We understand the program itself, and we're dedicated to the AIG. So let's get stuck into the first product. If you're providing any advice in your work, whether that's drill rig design or supervision or resource estimates, one of your biggest exposures is professional indemnity. At its most basic, PI will cover you from losses arising out of your professional advice or your services, which give rise to a financial loss. There's often a requirement if you're doing services like this in your contract that you have the appropriate PI insurance in place. Our insurance program, when it comes to PI, has been set up to take into account a wide scope of services. Many of those are listed on the slide. We've tried to make it really broad, just to make it so you don't have to change it as you go throughout the year. The policy is designed for geos, and we understand most of the services that they're providing, and most of those are automatically covered. If there are services that don't fit in the box, we have a really good relationship with the insurer, and we've probably seen it before, and it's usually fine. Typically just maybe an additional premium required. For anybody that's a client or a previous client, you'll see on our online portal, which we'll touch on later. It's a pretty easy. There's a green box. These are the services that we're covering. And then a amber box. These are the services that we can cover, but just need some more information. The reason that sometimes we need more information, depending on what you're doing, is there are a few higher risk activities. Exploration management is a big one. We've seen clients that are doing more tenement licensing management or environmental remediation work, and those things carry a higher risk. So we can cover them, but we just need some more information. If you're not doing those things, you'll see it's super straightforward to get a policy. One thing I will say, it's incredibly important to be aware of what you're covered for, so to understand when you're going through this process, and make sure it matches up with your services. This is also for anybody who's maybe taken up professional indemnity through a different provider, especially maybe online providers, is, if your policy says geologist, it's just good to understand what that means, what the insurers think that means, and make sure it lines up. If you're an exploration manager, you have people working under you, the insurer may not consider that a geologist. So that's why, it's really important just to make sure that the insurer understands exactly what you're doing, and you're confident that the policy will respond to cover a claim. These policies typically start around $1,200 a year, and it does depend on what you're doing and your size, your revenue, things like that. And we'll touch on it later, but it's really easy to get a quote. We have an online portal. As an AIG member, you get a 10% discount off the premiums. Yeah. The second key policy included in our program is public liability. If you're running a business, as a consultant contractor, public liability is a given. Most businesses in any industry have it, and geoscience is no different. It's really a base level cover to trade, and it's typically a requirement to have evidence of public liability if you're signing a contract, and definitely when you're going on site. Same as, if you have a lease, you also need public liability insurance. This policy is going to provide you cover for losses arising out of property damage or bodily injury. So that's the key difference. Professional indemnity is, your advice, your services. Public liability is more of an accident, like a slip and fall, or injury. That's how I would think of it. For geos, the risk exposures, what this means is it's typically associated with site visits or physical work. But what some people sometimes don't think about is it's also supervising others, supervising your own contractors or supervising the contractors of the exploration company. If you're having any authority or responsibility for site safety and somebody gets injured, that is public liability that would respond to something like that. Some of the high risk activities from a public liability standpoint include, if you're the exploration manager or site senior executive, SSC, you're taking responsibility for the safety of everyone on site. So if there's an injury, you're liable. We've seen claims in this area. Sorry, excuse me. We've seen claims from exploration managers where they didn't even meet the contractor on site that got injured, but they're still responsible. Sorry, excuse me. Some of the other key risks are, if the site's based overseas in Africa or something, the risks are a little bit different. If you have any of your own contractors or labor hire staff, that's a big thing in public liability right now. Even if there's workers' compensation in place. So if somebody gets injured and they're claiming workers' comp, what actually happens is the workers' comp insurers can sue your public liability policy to recover some of the costs because of the costs of injury are so high right now. So that's the main area that we're seeing claims, and it's why you really do need the right public liability policy if you're working on site or if you're having any sort of supervisory capacity, which most consultants we've worked with do. This policy is relatively inexpensive. They're typically about $600 per annum, and it obviously depends on what you're doing and your size, your revenue, but it doesn't increase as much as professional indemnity because the risks are different. So this is a good one. If you're just starting out, make sure you have public liability no matter what, and then happy to chat to see if you need professional indemnity, because that's more different. That depends on the services you're doing, whereas everybody should have public liability as a consultant. So we'll just quickly touch on the next few slides. This one's about digital risk. And when we talk digital risk, we're really looking at how to proactively protect your business with cyber insurance. Or if not cyber insurance, cyber risk management. We've seen an increased frequency of clients being asked to have a cyber policy. So sometimes in your contracts, you might require one, and it really does depend on what you're doing. If you're doing any sort of data management or maybe like digital modeling, mapping, anything like that, where you're really reliant on your computer or your data, this is a good one to think about. With an increasing privacy obligations and risks in general, so chance of getting hacked, there's a real chance of having that data exposed and not being able to operate. And if you're reliant on your computer or your systems and you can't operate for 2 weeks, or you lose all your data, that could be quite a serious cost attributed. So this is a good one to think about. What we can share after as well is there's some free resources that anybody can use from the government to improve their cyber hygiene, and we'll send some links. This policy management liability is more targeted at businesses with a few staff or investors, not so much the sole trader. It's essentially the management of the business is what it's protecting, and that's things of mismanagement that causes financial loss to shareholders or creditors. It's also covered for employees, so think of things like wrongful dismissal, harassment, things like that, OH&S, and crime or theft of funds. So again, if you're a business with a few staff or any investors, anything like that, big loans on your business, you should really be considering management liability. Equipment insurance. Many of our clients use equipment in the day-to-day. Some may have laptops or XRF analyzers, whatever it is. If you have quite a significant asset list, you should probably be covering it with insurance. The policies that we can arrange, again, we understand uh, what geos are doing. You're going to site, you're using them in some pretty weird places sometimes, and the policies are covering that, and they're usually pretty affordable. Again, it just depends on the value of the items you're covering, but they start from $200 or $300 to cover laptops, or you can even cover drones. It really depends on what you need. But if you have an asset list, this is a good one to think about. Depending on the nature of your business, there's other insurances. You might need corporate travel insurance if you're responsible to cover yourself going to site. Lots of our clients, especially one going to site in Africa, have this. There's also things like personal accident, which I touched on earlier. That's similar to workers' comp. If you're a sole trader and you want to cover yourself for injury, so if you get injured while you're working and need to cover your wages, that's a really important one, personal accident. And then there's just the various other business insurances. If you need them, we can assist. So we've gone through the insurance side of things. Let's look at the risk management. So this is something that's really important as a consultant, a contractor, you're a business owner, and insurance is just one piece of the puzzle of protecting yourself. The first thing you should be looking at is improving your risks. So we've categorized this into the different insurance policies, and we've really summarized it. But if anybody has any questions, give me a call and I can help sort of tailor something. In A, the first one, we have professional indemnity. So as pointed out earlier, you really want to be certain that what you're doing in terms of your professional services are covered. That's the big thing, understanding the services you're providing. And again, like when you're looking at your contract, at your scope of works, just making sure that those things line up. Understanding the contractual implications when you sign a piece of work, and how these clauses may affect your insurance and the other risks that you're bringing on. We'll look at this in the next slide in more detail because it's so important, but looking at your contract, managing your risk through your contracts is the number one thing that you need to consider. In point B, just below, we have public liability. Some of the more pertinent risk considerations include the location of your work. Is it a pure office environment, which would be sort of the risk would be minimal, or are you going to site? Are you going underground? Are you going overseas? Making sure you have all of the checks and balances in those things, the right insurance policies. Are you doing physical work? No, are you using big equipment? Most of our consultants, our clients aren't doing things like this. Like they're not doing any drilling. Site-based work might be, driving around in a four-wheel drive, which is pretty normal, especially in an exploration site where there's not much there that could go wrong. But again, it's making sure that you understand your role in site safety. That's the big one. That's what we've been touching on sort of this whole presentation is if somebody gets injured, how are you going to be responsible, even if you weren't there? And again, going back to the professional indemnity one, often it shows in your contracts what your role is. Most senior geologists, whether you're an exploration manager or not, you have responsibility for safety. And this is where a lot of the risk lies. So just making sure you understand that is really important. Digital risk. I guess we just can't stress enough the value of at least having some basic training for yourself, and especially if you have any employees on cyber hygiene and making sure your system's up to date, making sure you use multi-factor authentication and backups and all the stuff that the government's pushing. And again, we can provide some free information. We have some info on our website. It's really easy to get your systems up to date, and it is important as well. In point D, we have management liability. As we touched on, management liability is all about managing the business. So it really comes down to your policies and procedures, and making sure your employees and your staff are aware of them. In point E, equipment, and this is just your normal equipment maintenance, making sure you have accurate records. You have all your serial numbers are up to date. You have proof of purchase, all of those sorts of things, especially if you have them insured. You want to make sure that your asset register is up to date. If you're replacing equipment, making sure you tell your insurance company so it can be updated. And just generally maintaining your equipment. And then other risks, that's just generally, assessing the risk, making sure you understand what they are, and if you need insurance, that you're looking into that. This is one of our last slides, and we'll stay on this one for a little while. So, as we've mentioned, contracts are probably the most important consideration as a consultant. You'll spend a lot of time, if you're not a consultant already, if you are, then you definitely know you will spend a lot of time negotiating your contracts, understanding them, and understanding them is crucial. And making sure that they line up with your insurance policies is also crucial. We've seen a lot of unique contract requirements pop up over the last 10 or so years. And marrying these with your insurance policy is number one. If there's a gap, and something happens, that's where the insurer may not look to respond to a claim. So it's always good to send us your contract as your broker. It's our job to help you through it, and making sure that your policies are compliant with what they're asking for. Now, we just want to preface it. We'll get into some of the details, but want to preface the discussion by saying we're not lawyers. We can't give legal advice. All we can do is comment on the insurance implications. And if you're ever in doubt, we always recommend getting legal advice. It should be part of your process anyways. Some of the contracts, from these mining and exploration companies, there's a lot of risk in them, and you're taking on a lot of that risk yourself. So we strongly recommend not taking that too lightly, and also not just relying on the insurance policy. As we'll mention, a lot of what's in the contract can be covered by insurance, but a lot of it is also just your own risk. And even if it is covered by insurance, nobody likes to get sued and go through that. So contracts are really important, and it's really important to make sure that you understand them. So what we'll talk about now is some of the specific clauses that you might see in your contract. Now, if you haven't seen these yet, I might sound like I'm speaking gibberish, but this is good just to keep in your back pocket in case you have a contract, and just understanding what these mean and what it means to you. So the first one, limitation of liability. This is a normal clause in a lot of contracts, but it's important to understand if it has a limit, if it's sort of limited to the fees. Again, not a lawyer, but that makes sense. We often see ones where they maybe limit to the insurance policy, which obviously isn't ideal. It would typically be a higher limit than the fees, and maybe it's disproportionate to the type of work you're doing. So again, that's one where we often see more senior geologists negotiating a lot. And that's one good thing to remember is you can negotiate these. That's what contracts are. And use us as well. Ask us questions, and we can provide you with some ammunition for your negotiations. Second one is cost liability and non-imputation. This essentially treats your principal or your client as a separate insured. So if you breach the policy and they need to recover from your policy, it doesn't impact it. The third one, really important if you're working with overseas projects or overseas clients, is the governing jurisdiction. This essentially says, who you're working for, where they're located, and where they can sue you. So if you have a project in Africa, but the client is a US domiciled business with an office in Canada, like you need to understand if something goes wrong, where you're going to have to go to court, basically. Often with US companies, they have a US jurisdiction. Now, most policies have insurance policies exclude the US. So if you have a contract with a US jurisdiction and you haven't updated your policy, that means you're not covered. So that's why it's really important to understand that and making sure that the policies sort of are structured in the right way to cover you. Outside of the insurance, why that is important to understand is it's typically more expensive to defend yourself overseas for obvious reasons, and especially in the US where it's more litigious, it's more expensive as well. So we would typically push our clients to negotiate an Australian jurisdiction. So if there's something goes wrong, you're at least defending the claim locally, and it's a lot more straightforward. Fourth one, principal's indemnity. This does impact your policy because it essentially allows the principal, your client, usually the mining company, the exploration company, to be covered by your policy for work you perform on their behalf. And similar with the waiver of subrogation, what this essentially means is you're waiving your insurer's right to recover off of your client. So if something happened and it was deemed that you were at fault, but so were they, but let's share 50%. And our insurer, your insurer wanted to recover some of those costs off of your client, that essentially says, no, you can't do that. And naturally, it just increases the risk, increases the costs of your insurer. So usually that can be passed back onto you through more premium. So that's another thing to consider when you're signing these contracts. We always say don't sign them until you've made sure your insurance policies are up to date, because what can happen is you have to increase your cover, and it can cost, sometimes it can cost up to $5,000 more, depending on the fees and depending on what needs to be done. And you would typically want to push that into your contract so you're not out of pocket. And sometimes you can get the mining company, the exploration company to pay for the additional costs. We've seen it done before. So if you've already signed it, sometimes you don't have that flexibility. So it's good to make sure this stuff is sorted before you finish and sign your contract. Yeah, so these clauses are all, we can get them covered. It's just different things to be aware of. So we always recommend having a discussion with us. And it's our job. That's what we're here for. We're advisors more than we are insurance brokers. So we want to help you. We want to consult with you and make things easier. Okay, so let's go through some frequently asked questions. I'll go through these fairly quickly, but these are the questions that we get a lot. So if you have any yourself, just let me know after this or after the webinar. So the first one, what limits do I need? As mentioned, this will depend on your contract requirements, nature of your work, the fees attributed to your work. And it's important to consider what could happen. So we can provide you options. We can't tell you which limit to take. But what we want you to think is if something went wrong, what could it be and what would be the worst case scenario. In your contracts, as I mentioned on the previous slide, if there is a limitation of liability clause in there, with the fees, let's say 200 grand, and you have a 1 mil limit, just keep in mind that you also need to maybe account for some defense costs, which are on top of that, and any other thing that can go wrong. You obviously will have multiple contracts at once normally, so there's lots of different considerations, and that's just where I'd start, is just thinking about those things. Second one, if you ever bought PI insurance, you probably have had this question. It's why do you have to have it after you stop working or you end the contract? As a consultant, if you sign a contract for a year, maybe you're an employee and you go to consult and then you go back into full-time work, you'll have the urge to cancel your professional indemnity policy, which is, you're right, but the reason we recommend not doing it is PI insurance is retroactive cover. So it's covering you for work performed in the past. And if a claim occurs, you need to have a current policy for it to respond. So even if you had a policy when the work happened, the work that's caused the claim happened, if you canceled it, then it doesn't exist anymore and you can't access it. The reason they do that, it's all PI insurance. It's just because of the nature of claims. They usually come several years after. So the underwriters want to basically underwrite the risk and charge you premium for it currently based on what could happen from the work that you've done in the past. This is why you'll see that contracts require you to maintain PI insurance for several years. Most contracts might say 3 years, or some will say 7 years, which is the statute of limitations. And that's why. If you are closing your business or retiring, there's options. It's called runoff insurance. I won't get into it now because it's a little bit complicated, but essentially it's just giving you access to your policy without having to renew it year after year. So there are options, and again, just let us know if you have any questions about it. So the third one, what do we mean about physical or manual work? So if you're getting a quote, you'll see we asked this question, but we understand that, core logging, soil sampling, driving in four-wheel drive, to us, that's not physical or manual work. That's just being a geo. What we mean is, using heavy equipment. If you're clearing swaths of land with cranes, or if you're actually doing drilling or anything like that, installing equipment in boreholes or something, that's where we want to understand it a little bit more, and the insurers will want to understand it. So that's what we are talking about when we say physical or manual work. The fourth one, we mentioned cyber insurance quite a bit, but one question that we've had is, I'm a geo, I work with rocks. Do I really need cyber insurance? The answer is maybe. If you're operating online, using mapping software, you're storing data, you probably should have it, or at least consider it. And the last one, contracts again. Do we need copies of all your contracts? It's a service. Like, you don't have to pay us anymore to review your contracts. We want to help with it. So you should send us your copies, at least ones that are different, and we can make sure that they comply with your insurance policies, and we can also have a chat about it and maybe help upskill you on some of the insurance implications, and the risks in general, and just help you in that process. So yeah, send us copies. It's what we're here for. We want to help. So next steps, how can you access the offering? As some of you may know, we have an online portal. You can access it through the AIG website or through our website, kbigroup.com.au, and it's really easy. You can get a quote in 5 minutes, and if you buy a policy, you get your certificates of currency and everything right away as well. And we also offer monthly payments, And you can get public liability, like we mentioned. All consultants should have public liability. You can get that, or professional indemnity. One of the good things I think is you can play around with the limits, so you can put in all these different limit combinations and different sort of, if you're working overseas, you're not working overseas, you can do that all and you get live updates to your premium. So you can really see, especially if you're just starting out, the different decisions you're making, how it'll impact your insurance premiums. Okay, thanks everyone. I'm not sure how many people are here live, but if anybody has any questions, now's the time.
Yeah, Tyler, there's a question actually via the chat. So can you read it, or do you want me to read it to you?
If you could read it, that would be great.
Yeah, okay, cool. So it's from Andrew Richmond. So it says, Tyler, thanks for the presentation. And you provide a great service that I have used for a number of years. With Chubb being the only insurer that KBI, AIG use, is there any risk that they will withdraw from the market? And if they do, what notice period will we have? Also, have Chubb reviewed the 2024 draft short code? And will they continue to provide PI insurance for this updated code to competent persons?
Yeah, great question. So firstly, yeah, we've used Chubb. We haven't always used Chubb. They're the third insurer on the program. I guess two aspects to the question. Will they withdraw from the market? Really unlikely. They're like, from the market in general, definitely not. They're one of the largest insurers in the world, but from this program specifically, they've had a really good experience. It's been a really positive program for them. So it's really unlikely. If they do, it'll be as simple as just finding a new insurer. We've done it before, and there's a lot of insurers in the market, and the market in general is softening. So that really isn't a concern. If something does happen, there's lots of options, and we're full service insurance brokers as well. We're not tied to Chubb. If we don't have to be, they're just a really good partner right now. And on the JORC code, yeah, it's of course their intention to continue covering JORC reports. I'm not sure they've reviewed it extensively, but we're aware of it and they're aware of it. So we'll keep our eye on it, and if anything changes, we'll obviously communicate that to members. But at the moment, it's business as usual.
Cool. Thanks, Tyler. There's another one from Tim Cross. So he said, I'm just starting out in a consulting role, subcontracting to an existing consultancy and planning for now, to simply invoice them at a daily rate using my ABN as a sole trader. They've said that their insurance will cover me. So should I take them at their word?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd say to that, you're taking on the risk. So you'd want to make sure that if you do anything wrong, you are covered. Just review the contract. Don't take the word for it in an email. Review the contract and make sure that it lines up. Have a lawyer look at it and just make sure. Because if they are covering you, the way that the insurances would work is it would have to be as a in your contract. So I'd have to say, the exploration company X agrees to indemnify the consultant for work performed, that sort of thing. It should be quite clearly in there. So that's all I would do. Just starting out, it's a good outcome. Like, you want to keep your costs down. You don't always want to have to buy your own insurance. So that is one way of transferring your risk. That's all insurance is risk transfer. But just make sure that it is in your contract.
Okay, cool. Yeah, there's another one from Andrew. Can we get US insurance for a single project?
It depends. Typically, depending on the size, single project insurance is typically reserved for larger projects. So normally at this size, with what we see from AIG members, you have to just update your whole policy to cover the US. And the other thing, we've actually just been working on this with a few different clients. If it's professional indemnity insurance and you expand it to the US and it's a 2-month job, you have to maintain your PI insurance over, however many years you want the cover for. So that's why if it's like a small job in the US, that's one of the risk considerations is you're signing up to cover that for many years. So it's one of the considerations. But yeah, in short, if it's a large project in the US, you can look at it, but at this size, probably not. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time and for listening. And if you have any questions, our details are there. Give me a call, send me an email. Always happy to assist. Yeah, thanks everyone for your time, and thanks again to the AIG for setting this up.